He calls it inner kill. He said it's
Oh.
like you're dying and you don't even know it.
Do you think humans can actually just stop working, stop all the contributions that they do in a work setting, properly retire without putting replacement measures in place for what work was fulfilling?
Today, this card opens many doors. Tomorrow, it won't be worth the paper it's written on. That a whole bunch of my life, I lived on autopilot, doing what I was doing because I thought I was supposed to do it. Not because I consciously chose it or consciously thought about it at all. Then I would say, at what cost? And how much is enough? And so when you uncover the other parts of you, they become alive.
Welcome back to the You Potential podcast. Today, my guest is Marianne Oehser. She's a retirement coach, a relationship coach, an author, and someone who has failed at retirement. Yes, she failed at retirement because she didn't realize what retirement was all about and was missing a key ingredient. This conversation is, how do we maintain ourselves, our identity, or perhaps our new identity when we transition from the working world to the retired world? And it's important because this is the last chapter of your life. Before we head into this episode, I would love if you can hit subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We really appreciate it. And now, I hope you enjoyed this fascinating conversation with Marianne Oehser. Marianne Oehser, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
I'm excited to talk to you about many things. Your story, your book, Happiness Portfolio. What a great name, by the way. And I know that what we will not talk about is retirement, despite you orientate your career around retirement. Marianne, help me understand. Your career is about helping people in retirement, but yet you don't like retirement. What's going on here?
Well, it's not that I don't like that phase of your life. What I don't like is what people call it. Because, that time that we frequently call retirement is maybe a third of your life, certainly a quarter. And when it's described as in negative terms, because most of the visuals that people have are people getting old and people failing and people no longer being at their prime. And well, it's a whole lot different than that. It's a whole lot more than that. If you focus on it being the end, it's the end, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's how you think about it. And so I don't like the word because it conjures up so many negative things that it clouds your thinking.
If the internet's correct, I understand you tried this retirement thing at 40 years old, but it didn't go so well?
It did not. It did not. My former husband and I worked for a large company, and we both had senior positions, and there was a hostile takeover, and we both got golden parachutes. Hey, fantastic. We had just built a house in Southwest Florida and said, hey, how could we? This is a blessing. Thank you, thank you. And he was 18 years older than I. And so we moved down there, and everything was great for a while, as it often is when people leave their careers. And then, the everyday reality sets in. And in that particular time, I wasn't ready to stop working. And so I, went on and was doing some other things locally, and so much lower scale and much less pressure. But my former husband didn't adapt at all, and it created conflict. And in the end, it caused a divorce. So I went back to the corporate world because I just wasn't ready to stop. So what I learned though in that process was how, when you expect that this time after your career is going to be just 30 years or whatever years of it is of a great big vacation, it's unrealistic and it's not sustainable. Because, vacations are wonderful. We all look forward to them and we most of the time enjoy them. But there's also comes a time when it's time to get back to whatever else you were doing. So if you think about your whole life as being that, it's not sustainable. And then when it stops, and often the industry calls the first 6 to 18 months of the time after you are no longer working, your retirement honeymoon. And like all honeymoons, it comes to an end. And when it does, it leaves so many people disillusioned and disappointed and thinking, well, this isn't what I expected. And maybe I made a mistake. I shouldn't have retired. Or often, which is what got me to where I am right now, what happens is they blame their spouse for being the problem. And so that creates relationship issues. So I don't like the word because it creates those false expectations that people then aren't prepared for the changes and the transitions and the things that normally happen, that do not have to derail relationships and do not have to make you sad and unhappy and think your life is over. So that's why I don't like the word retirement.
Do you think people can properly retire? When I say
If you mean by
properly,
retire, what do you mean by retire?
yeah, this notion that we have, we're going to enjoy all our time, sit on those nice chairs looking out at the lake or wherever the view is, and just enjoy all this time that we have because we're all time scarcity. Do you think humans can actually just stop working, stop all the contributions that they do in a work setting, and properly retire without putting replacement measures in place for what work was fulfilling?
Some people can, but I'm here to tell you it's very, very few of us. And the truth is that however you decide that you want to design this time after work, what you just described should definitely be part of it. I'm not saying that
Mhm.
it shouldn't be. It's just that because of who we are and how we're made up, we need more than just that. We need that, but we need also mental and social stimulation. We need to feel like we're doing things that matter and make a difference in the world in some way, whether it's planting a rose garden for your neighbors or whether it's taking care of your grandchildren or whether it's saving rainforests. It doesn't matter the scope. It's just that if you don't feel like you are contributing in some way, it's Richard Leider is the author of The Power of Purpose, and is just a real guru on the whole subject. And what he says is that when you don't have that sense of purpose, he calls it inner kill. He said it's
Mm,
like you're dying and you don't even know it.
mm,
I mean, think about people that you've known who are, particularly as they advance in age, but anytime they're just fundamentally unhappy. They're just,
mhm.
just like nothing's quite right. And that's really what it is. They don't have that. What it is it's a basic human need. And when that need isn't being fulfilled, w- it creates emotional problems for us. So, yet would it be lovely to sit by the lake 24/7? Well, it sounds like it would be, but at some point for most of us, we need more than that. We need that plus more. And that's why I created the concept of a happiness portfolio because a portfolio, like a financial portfolio has asset classes. My happiness portfolio has asset classes, and there are 8 of them. And they're the aspects of our life that it's important for us to consciously think about and to consciously decide what we want it to look like and how we're going to make that happen.
Super interesting. I want to go into the asset classes. I can't stop thinking about your time at 40 years old. I believe you said going down to South Florida,
Yes, Southwest Florida.
Southwest Florida. This is what dreams are made of. People
You bet.
spend their entire lives dreaming about Florida or wherever. Arizona, I live in Edmonton, so that tends to be the snowbird location of choice. Yet you find yourself there at 40 at a relatively or quite young age. You mentioned conflict twice when you're talking about that. If you don't mind, where was this conflict coming from? You had everything. The house, sounds like money, but time,
Relationship.
relationship.
Yeah. I mean, everything, everything. The conflict came both internally and interrelationshiply. Internally, it was because the first thing, it didn't take me very long before I said, I'm I'm bored. I'm not contributing in any way. My mind is getting dull. It's just so there was a conflict within me that this with all the beauty, and we lived a block, short walking block to the beach. We lived in
Mm.
a place where we had this wide open water view. It was perfect. It was idyllic. It was exactly what you would, if I could have painted a picture, it was what I would have wanted. But without, because those needs I have weren't being fulfilled, one of the things that it created was conflict in the relationship because all of a sudden the expectations and assumptions that each of us had weren't in sync. And that's often what happens with couples when they move into this time of their life. They haven't really talked about the details of it because they haven't thought about the details of it. And so therefore if they're not on the same page, when when the differences present themselves, it creates conflict.
You spend a lifetime hoping for this, and you're right. As a couple, we often don't talk about what does retirement look like together with all this time. I know you do a lot of work, not only with retirement planning, but relationship coaching as well.
In fact, it was relationship coaching that that moved me into focusing on retirement. Um,
Mm.
and that was because of my experience that we just talked about when I was 40. And I went back to the corporate world and along the way met this wonderful man that I'm now married to for 25 years. And during the time
I
when it
just
was
have to
time,
say something. The way you said a wonderful man, you just lit right up. So he sounds like a great man.
yeah, it's still a wonderful relationship. And so when it was time for me to leave the corporate world the second time, I knew I needed to go to something. Knew that sitting on the beach wasn't going to make it. And so I became a relationship coach too, because I wanted other people to have what we had.
Mhm.
And what happened was, and at that point we lived in Naples, which is Southwest Florida, and people would come into my office, and a lot of them were around retirement age, although I hadn't focused on that at the time. But I heard the same story. They kept saying, "We had this great relationship, and now all we do is bicker and fight." And many of them, believe it or not, were I was the last step on the way to the divorce lawyer. And what it was for almost all of them was one of two things. One of them was what I just mentioned. Their their assumptions weren't in alignment, and it was off. And I can tell you what seems like a made up story because it's so amazing. And so their assumptions weren't in alignment. But it's also sometimes that when you make that huge transition from the career phase of your life to this new phase of your life, so much changes. I mean, everything changes. And that dealing with that change impacts relationships, particularly if you weren't prepared for the fact that it's going to change and prepared for the fact that, okay, that means we need to work on this together so that we all get through it. That's where the two big sources of conflict are in relationships, which unfortunately contributes a lot to the gray divorce statistic. The gray divorce meaning the percentage of people over 50 that are getting divorced, which over the last 20 years has more than doubled. It's the only cohort in the population where divorce is increasing.
Almost doubled. Wow.
And actually, for people over 65, it's tripled. And now
You
there are many circumstances that cause that, but I contend that one of the major ones is what are they going through? They're going through this kind of transition that creates this change, which creates conflict sometimes.
It's an entire identity shift.
For most people, it is.
And if we don't reconcile with that, it's like you're losing the old identity. And to your point, your second retirement, you have to retire to something. And humans thrive on that identity or that sense of cohesion in life that my place makes sense. And it seems like counterintuitive, but if you retire without that sense of identity, you're kind of a rudderless boat aimlessly adrift in the sea.
And unfortunately, that happens to an awful lot of people.
Mm.
Now, and I think also, so often awareness is one of the big anecdotes for for some of the problems that can happen. So if you understand that, yes, your identity is going to shift, and I learned that a long time ago from my father. My father was a senior vice president at Sears Roebuck when Sears Roebuck was a was a formidable company in this world. The corner office overlooking Lake Michigan. He had the whole thing. And so and I'm the oldest of 9 children. So just before his retirement, like the weekend before, we were all together sitting around the table. And at the end of the discussion, which he was great at preventing, he got really quiet, and all of a sudden he picked up something I didn't notice was on the table, and it was his business card. And he held it up and he said, "Today, this card opens many doors. Tomorrow, it won't be worth the paper it's written on." And to me, and I now know what I know, that sums up what happens with your identity. And so it's something to be reckoned with for many of us. And if you don't recognize that it's coming, it's even worse.
That's wild, hey? His position, and many similar ones, so much power, so much energy put into that business card, that career, but yet the next day, it's not even worth that piece of paper.
It's written on. I know.
It kind of puts my head in a tailspin. What's it all for? And it makes sense. Like, we want to give her a strong effort because we get a sense of meaning and satisfaction. I think what I'm wrestling with right now is that we have to have that awareness to, like you said, that one day this will go, and we can't create our whole sense of self on this business card.
Well, yes, there are many things that you said that we can expand on. The first part is, yes, we really are much more than just our business card. And yet in our career, when so much of our time and effort is focused on delivering what that business card says we do, you sort of forget about the other aspects of who you are as a human being. And sometimes for some of us, they kind of atrophy a little bit. Um, so it's, you as a fundamental person aren't less. It's just that part of what you had focused as how you saw yourself and how you see yourself fitting in the world and how the world sees you fitting in has to change. Now, that doesn't mean that it's bad. It doesn't mean that it's all downhill and if things are, nothing good is ever going to happen. I can tell you lots and lots of stories about where this time of your life is actually the best time of your life for a whole lot of people. It's just, sometimes you have to grieve that loss of that business card.
Mm-hmm.
No question about that. But you have to recognize also that you are much more than just that. And so when you uncover the other parts of you, they become alive and they then expand and can take much more of your mental and physical time and can lead to whole different places many times that you'd never imagined that you would go. But you have to be open to doing it. That's why you have to let go of what your business card says, grieve it, and then celebrate the fact that there's so much more ahead.
There are many different ways I want to go from here. However, my brain can't go back or can't think about when you talked about our assumptions in relationships. You said, I have a great story.
Sure. You want to
It
go
was
there?
a good cliffhanger. My brain's like, I want to hear this great story.
All right. True story. Naples, Florida. Obviously well-to-do couple. Come in and they're sitting in my office, and it's the typical scenario that at that point I'd become kind of used to. They come in, he sits down, she sits down, her arms go like this. He starts talking. He's talking about the trips they've taken and the golf he's enjoying playing. When people think about the retirement, they often name their bucket list, and that's how they view it's going to be. And of course, it's much more than that. But anyway, so the more he talked, the more her jaw got really like, "Grr." And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she bursts. "Why do I always have to do the laundry? I'm retired too." True story. He looked at her like she was from Mars. He had no idea what she was talking about. And what had happened is She had assumed that because he was going to have more time now, he would pitch in with the household stuff, and she didn't particularly like doing the laundry. He assumed she liked doing that stuff. So when she dropped the hints about him helping, they were going nowhere. And it wasn't until literally at that moment that it even occurred to him that she might want some help. She, on the other hand, thought he should just know it. So they never really talked about it. And that's one of the couples that was literally on the way to the divorce lawyer. And when we started unpacking, not just, I mean, the laundry was obviously not the breaking point, but
Mhm.
it was emblematic of all the other
Right.
stuff that was there. And once you could unpack it and they could come to common ground, they didn't need the divorce attorney. They were just fine.
Yeah, I mean, assumptions, to your point, they can be very challenging in relationships like this couple. They both assume that each other should know, but yet here we are on the brink of divorce. And it sounds like they didn't get divorced, so
They
that's a
did
good
not.
thing. You you talked about how much time we can spend in work and like how much of parts of us, our identity, that we should put into work while we're working.
Sure.
You're a bit older than me. Um,
A lot older. Come on, you're being kind.
um, you've been on this earth longer than me. When I'm asking for advice, actually, when you look back at those busy times of life, you're building a career. I don't know if you have kids, but there could be kids. It's just, busy time. How do you look at spending your time on work? Or from your vantage point now, what would you do differently? Or what would you do the same on how you spent your time on work?
I would change my mindset about how important it was. I mean, it was important, but for my generation, baby boomers, our work ethic was all about what are you going to achieve and how high are you going to get, and all that kind of stuff, to almost to the exclusion of other things in our life. Not a well balanced portfolio.
Mhm.
Some of the Gen Xers, and I don't know whether you're a millennial or a Gen X or whatever you are.
I'm 40. I think I'm a
uh, I think
Gen X.
I
Uh,
think you're Gen X. You're the
Gen
end
Y.
of Gen X. Okay.
Yeah.
What I know, and I know this from some research actually, that one of the organizations I'm very involved in is Exit Planning Institute, which we could talk about later. That's not important. But the president of that company, whose name is Scott Snyder, is he's a little older than you, but early 40s, and he has embraced the idea of this happiness portfolio for him and for his life. And that's one of the reasons why we're on the faculty of the Exit Planning Institute now, because he'd been looking for a way to organize how he thought about all this stuff that's your life, as most people are. And so the happiness portfolio is a framework to think about it. And if I had been his age or your age, had this concept that, okay, my professional is only 1/8 of my life. Now it may take up more than 1/8 of my time. It's how much do I invest in, the time? How do I, if I've got X number of hours, how do I want to divide it up among the things that are important? I don't have that concept. So for you and for Scott right now, he and his wife have gone through the exercise of creating their happiness portfolio so that their life will be more balanced than
Mhm.
people in my generations were. It's much healthier, much, much healthier.
So perhaps was this happiness portfolio born out of some reflection on your end being like, "Huh, I wish I had this when I was in my X years."
No, but when the idea started coming, I realized I wish I had. It was born when I was doing relationship coaching only, and that was my focus. I realized that where relationship angst happened was when in transitions. And
Mm.
so I really spent a lot of time studying and understanding transitions. And to help people in any transition, I realized that as things change, you need to have a framework to think about, what do I want the end result to be? What do I want the outcome to be? And so that's where the concept of happiness portfolio came from. It was inspired by my mentor, whose name is Nancy Schlossberg, who was a
Mm.
real guru in adult development and particularly on transitions. She's a terrific lady. She's 86. No, she's 96 right now, and she just had an article published in the Wall Street Journal, or someplace like that.
Wow.
I mean, seriously, she did. True story.
Wow.
But she, as I learned transitions from her and from her reading her books and papers and stuff, the concept that as you go through this transition, and we could spend an hour talking about just transitions, but you need some way to think about what you want it to turn out to be. And she called it a psychological portfolio, and that didn't resonate with me. And so when I realized, so I created the happiness portfolio to say, all right, well, how do I want to organize my life? And so to your question, it was because I knew I'd never done that. And
Mm.
I've been through a bunch of transitions and some big ones. And so I knew that when I started thinking about it, I realized how helpful it would have been for me if I had had that framework. But so I give it to other people now.
Yeah. Well, we are benefiting from your knowledge. Let's get into the portfolio. And I want to introduce it from a personal experience. You had mentioned that work, I believe you said, could have been 1/8 of your life at that point in time, but it sounded like it wasn't 1/8 of your time that you spent on it.
No, 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 no. Yeah,
How?
I would, let me just say,
Yeah,
it's just a small clarification before you ask your question.
for sure.
Um, I present the concept of happiness portfolio as a pie chart, like
Hmm.
it's a circle. And there are 8 pieces of it. And so it's presented as 8 equal pieces. Now, realistically, when you have a career and you need to earn a living and so forth, you're going to spend more than 1/8 of your time doing that.
For sure.
But
Yeah.
the concept is, if you consciously think about how much of your time you want to invest in each of those areas, it helps you to at least make conscious choices about what you're doing.
Hmm.
And so for me, the conscious choice only was this cultural pressure that you're supposed to be and do and
Mm.
create as best you can in your professional life. And in those days, women had like no place. That's another story for another podcast about how that has changed. But because my age cohort we're all focused on that, the amount of time that we invested in that one sliver of our lives crowded out almost everything else.
And that's something you said, if you could go back in time, you would modify.
I definitely would modify it. I
And
definitely
I,
would.
I appreciate how you answer that, because it's not a, you just explained many, many circumstances that might cause us to work more. As you mentioned, a female in a corporate world. I mean, I couldn't imagine the pressures that you had to perform, and it would cause you to want to work more and more. But I find it interesting that you say that you would have lessened the importance work felt.
Exactly, because, and that's a really important point, because if you put all of your emphasis on one of those aspects of your happiness portfolio, then the others, which are still also important, don't get any attention. And so if you don't see them as important, you don't invest your time in them. But when you can sit back and say, well, I'm a whole lot more than what my business card is. How do I want to invest my time in other aspects of me and who I am?
What happens if I say, if I spend the majority of my time on this business card or this business or whatever it is, it's going to provide me with the financial means to create more freedom, to create more things down the road. What would you say to me?
I would say that that's been the tale, and the truth is, for most of us, yes, the more time that you spend doing things, the more money you are able to generate. Uh, but then I would say, at what cost?
Mhm.
And how much is enough?
How much is enough for you?
That's a big question. But it's certainly not my big motivator.
Hi, it's Sean. I know I'm breaking into the conversation just for a moment. There's good reason. If you're here, it means you care about living with more purpose, more meaning, and deeper connection. And that's exactly what the You Potential podcast is all about. When you hit that subscribe button, conversations like this, the ones that challenge you to think differently and open to new possibilities, keep showing up to you every week. And when you share this episode with someone you care, you're not just passing along a podcast. You're giving them a chance to reflect, to grow, and maybe even to reimagine what a good life can look like for them. So please take a second, subscribe, share it with a friend. Let's spread the conversations that truly matter. Now back to the show. You know, I caught myself one time checking emails as people do in the evening. And I was doing it more and more frequently after my first child was born. And I remember thinking, like, yeah, I'm doing this because, I got to get the work done, get this promotion or whatever it was that I was telling myself so that I could spend all this time with my kid. Cause in my head, I had this vacation planned or something similar. But yet I remember one night, I'm like, damn, he's right there. He's only 6 months, but he's right there on the ground. I could just go play with him now and I can have that time.
That's the
And
mind shift right there.
And it's not saying like, we have seasons, like you said, it's not always equal,
No.
but I find it very grounding for when I want to go that way to just think about that again. And there are times, of course, where my work is greater than other months of the year, but I try to keep it as balanced as I can. Anyhow, all of a sudden I'm just yapping about myself. It's because you're making good insights here and I'm reflecting, and I hope the listeners are as well.
Well, good. See,
Happiness
then
port
that's the whole idea here, isn't it? Is to make you
Yeah,
reflect.
yeah, yeah, and I think that's what the portfolio is. So, happiness portfolio, you have 8 assets. Can we dive into however many you feel is relevant for this conversation?
Sure. Um, Particularly as we think about this next chapter after your career, because as I said, the happiness portfolio applies anywhere. One of
Mhm,
the big things, the questions people have to answer is for professional, do they want to have any professional component to their life? Do they want to invest any time in a professional component? And a whole bunch of people in this age, that's why retirement doesn't the word doesn't make any sense, because if you work, does that mean you're not retired? But you left it doesn't
mhm,
make any sense. So do you want something? And a lot of us do. And so therefore it's also, the check and balance thing, but how much of my time am I willing to invest in it? So professional is one. The second is an equally important one, and that is your primary relationship. It's asking yourself, does our relationship need a little repair right now? Is it rough around the edges and we can fix it a little bit? Or if it's fantastic, what are we going to continue to do to keep it that way and to continue to make it vibrant? So what is it that I want to do to invest in making that relationship the best it can possibly be? And this is why a conversation like this needs to be with your spouse, because in all aspects of this, you need to be on the same page.
mhm.
The next is family and friends.
Marianne, I'm sorry, my brain goes into
Yeah.
your wonderful husband and this relationship for 25 years. In that primary relationship, what do you think's been one thing that you've experienced either in your own relationship or all these relationships that you've coached with? There's one thing that you would say, make sure amongst everything else, do this.
The word is connection, but um, that's hard for some people to understand. It's fostering a connection, but in order to have that connection, so it's the main thing is to have the connection, which is to say that you feel like you totally understand each other. Oh, I mean, you don't agree with everything all the time, and you don't maybe understand the person on a situation. But because you have that connection that you want to understand, that you want to be on the same page, you're willing to explore, you're willing to discuss, you're willing to work through the differences. But in order to create that connection in the first place, there has to be trust. You have
Mhm.
to totally, completely trust each other in every way. And trust meaning, in addition to trust that they're going to be faithful and trust that they're not going to misspend money, it's trust that you can be vulnerable with them and you aren't going to place yourself in a position where you're going to intentionally be hurt. So that kind of vulnerability, the willingness to be vulnerable, because what that means is that when a conflict situation arises, you don't all each have to retreat into your war houses and start battling. But instead, you're able to say, wait a minute, something's not right here. Let's figure it out. And it's not like you're right and I'm wrong, or I'm wrong and whatever it is. It's not that. It's we've got a situation here that we both care about. Let's figure it out. And when you have trust and when you are capable of being vulnerable and authentic that way, because you trust that person, you can do so much in terms of dealing with the stuff that comes up.
Thank you for that. So, primary relationship was number 2. And number 3?
Family and friends, and they're not in any
Oh, okay.
particular
Yeah.
priority order, but family and friends. And in this case, how much time do you want to spend with your family and your friends? And as we in for you in your 40s, that is has a very big relevance, because how much time do you want to spend supporting your kids as they're growing up and going to their activities and being part of their lives in a meaningful way? In my generation, that didn't happen with most people, with most parents. They
Mhm.
just didn't allocate the time to it. But you have a choice to do it. For people that are moving into this third act of their life or their next chapter or whatever it is after your career, it also says, okay, as a couple, how much time are we going to spend with the grandchildren? And what one story for that is I was working with this is a single woman, and she was really excited about her next chapter, and she we were working on her happiness portfolio, and one time she came in and she said, I just had this horrible thing happen. And it turned out that she and her daughter, who was very important to her, were not on the same page about how much time her my client was going to spend with her daughter and her grandchildren. In fact, it turned out that the daughter said, because my client was saying, I can't wait to spend more time with your kids. And her daughter interpreted that to mean that she was going to take over the daycare for her children.
Mhm.
And my client had no intention of doing that. And it came to a real conflict situation until they were able to work it out. But that's assumptions again, right?
Yeah.
Her daughter assumed that the grandchild was going to be everything. She assumes that it was going to be more, but not everything. And so
Mhm.
it's about you being clear about how much time you're going to spend with your grandchildren, and your spouse is clear too. But another thing too is, now that you've got time that you can spend, it doesn't mean that you necessarily want to invest it in all the people that you consider friends. So, I also encourage people to sort of take inventory. Are there people that you spend time with now that drain you, and at the end of it, you're like, ugh. Well, if so, you probably want to consciously and slowly spend less and less and less time with them. And how about the people that energize you? Those are the people that you want to spend more time with. And if you think that you've got some void there, what are you going to do to increase your circle of friends that are going to energize you and enlighten you? So it's that kind of thinking to create your happiness portfolio about what are you consciously going to do to create the situation that you want.
I like how you not keep, but you referred to how are you consciously going to do this? What intention are you going to do? Because if we're not careful, that 1/8 allocation to work easily for many of us can just take over the rest. So
Absolutely.
I really appreciate how much you've been emphasizing and underlining this is a conscious effort because holy smokes, it can drown us if not.
You're so right, and perhaps one of the reasons why I do emphasize that so much is because as I was going through the process of, immersing myself in all of this stuff too, I came to the really, um, sad realization that a whole bunch of my life I lived on autopilot, doing what I was doing because I thought I was supposed to do it, not
Mhm.
because I consciously chose it or consciously thought about it at all. I was just supposed to do it, and so I did it. And so it is now really important to me
Mhm.
that the choices be conscious, intentional.
If you think back to those autopilot days you speak of, how much certainty did you feel at that time that this was the way?
Of course, I felt exactly that way because I wasn't really thinking about it.
Mhm.
It's what it was the mindset that I had bought into. And so therefore, I thought it was the right way to do it.
It's very interesting. I find that these types of conversations help people like myself who are in the middle of it all to see the forest through the trees, so to speak, because we can easily tell ourselves stories. Yeah, yeah, this is different. This is
Yes.
different. Just right now. This is a little different right now. My situation's a little different than yours. Well, thanks for helping another reflecting moment with me on this one. Not in order, but what would the next one be?
Giving back.
Mhm.
How do you want to give back? And that can be financially. And, I've worked with a lot of high net worth people where philanthropy is an issue, is a possibility, I should say. But it's much more about that. It's how do you want to give to your children or to your community or to the next door neighbor, or what is it that you want to do to in some way give back. Volunteering is a great way to do that. It's not good for everybody. I worked with one man one time, and let me just say, with with this happiness portfolio, I have some graphics that talk about each area, and the one that I use for giving back often is a picture of an older man, in a suit with this funny hat, like a outer space kind of hat on, and a child, so obviously his grandchild, with a similar kind of hat, and the child's finger was up like, and his eyes were big, like, oh, I get it. And the reason that I use that graphic, because now how does that mean giving back? For this particular client, one of the things he wanted to specifically give back to was his grandchildren, and it was to find ways to create curiosity
Mm.
so that his legacy, if you will, to them was to give them a love of asking questions and wanting to discover and wanting to explore new things and wondering why things happen. And so that was his way of giving back.
I love how you just got animated on that one. I feel like there's more to the story there, but a curious mind. What a beautiful gift. Hey, like as a child, this is what we do. And then at some point, we go into the work system or the social narrative out there and snuffs out that curiosity. But it's a life's work to relive that curiosity. And yes, I try that with my kids is try to be curious. Then they're like, Dad, why is this? Dad, why this? Why is this? I'm like, just because.
Yeah, there is that part of it.
Okay, so giving back, I've seen such compelling research on the enduring levels on our satisfaction when we give back and how it can increase our empathy levels to understand how other people experience this world. And it's just I think it's a wonderful thing to have in this portfolio.
Indeed, it is. The next one is health and well-being. No, health and wellness. Sorry, health and wellness. And of course, everybody understands that you need to exercise and eat well. And but in this case, yes, you want to specifically write down that plan because some research that was done among people that were preparing to retire, almost all of them said that the number one thing they were going to do was exercise and eat better. And when asked 6 months later what they were doing to do that, less than 50% of them were doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So the writing down and the having accountability is important. But I also look at that area as being more than just that because we know from some research that was done by the MacArthur Foundation in Canada and reported in a really great book called Live Long, Die Short by Roger Landry. And he reports that and then expands on it. And what the major finding of the MacArthur Foundation work, and it spawned dozens of significant other research projects. The major finding was that 70% of our physical aging and close to 50% of our mental aging is determined by our lifestyle, the
Mm-hmm.
choices that we make every day. So genes, yeah, that's important, but the lifestyle choices that you make every day are what would determine how long you're going to live. And so it's all about what are you going to do to make those good choices? And it's yes, exercise is one of them, but it's a whole lot of other things too.
Mm-hmm.
It's the social connection, that friends and family. That's another important part of health and well-being.
Really, really, those connections. Some friends of mine, we run a couple days a week, and it's just the best. And it's combining two of these. So
Yep, there you
I
go. And
I,
that's
I
that's
enjoy
the
that.
best, right?
All right. So what's the next one?
Self-development. And here and again, it's at any stage of your life. How are you going to keep yourself growing?
Mm-hmm.
Growing as a person, helping your growing your mind, growing everything. And particularly as you think about life after your career, how are you going to stay relevant? How are you going to stay informed? How are you going to keep your mind sharp? How are you going to just be involved in the world in more than just watching what's on TV? So how are you going to continue to grow as a person? Self-development. Um, I think the last one then where we are is uh, spiritual and emotional well-being. And that's the whole part of how do you nurture that part of you that needs to that is the one who likes to sit by the lake and just be and to experience the moment and be so aware of everything that's around you. That would be a perfect part of
Mm-hmm.
expressing well-being. But I forgot leisure. That reminds me. Leisure is an important part of it. Leisure is a very important part of our lives. The
Yeah.
interesting thing about leisure, though, is it's it changes as you move into this next chapter. For you at 40, um, leisure, a vacation, is to, or whatever you do for leisure, it helps to recharge your batteries.
Mm-hmm.
It's a break in the action. It's a something different. It just makes you feel better, and you've got more energy than when you go back to whatever it was you're doing. But it shifts after you're not working. It's no longer that because you already got all this free time. It's not that you need a break from that. It becomes much more of a what is it that you're doing that helps you to feel good and how does it foster your social connections? So it now becomes is a whole different objective than it does when you're 40 and immersed in your career.
I on that point, it's very interesting. I've met people around my age who have like looked at vacations a little differently, and maybe they alter their life so they can have more leisure or more time around, like on holidays. But they don't necessarily call it holiday. It's time away. And my wife and I spent 2 years traveling around the world, pre-kids, pre-careers, and it's really altered for me. Like travel is about like exploration, learning,
Mhm.
seeing things said, done in different ways. And we've tried to do that with our kids even, and not to take like these retreat holidays. When I say retreat, not like go sit on the beach and charge those batteries. While many people do that, and that's totally, totally fine, I've just felt a lot. I've experienced a lot of value in seeing time away as an opportunity to explore, to see things in a different way, and we're hoping our kids see it that way as well.
That also recharges your battery.
It does for us.
Absolutely does. Yeah.
Mhm.
One of the
Y
things I admire about what you're talking about and the way you're living your life and the way your generation in general is just you have much better life balance, much better respect for the need for uh, investing time in a different way.
well, I think your generation paved the way for that.
Oh, good examples of how not to do it, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
that's yeah, like, we do the best of what we can with the information that we have. Um, I can also tell you many things that I'm doing poorly.
Everybody should have that
Oh,
list
yeah.
because
Marianne, you mentioned spiritual well-being. I'm curious, what role does it play in your overall life?
it's an extremely important part of my overall life. And I will say that there was a big section of my life where it was not. I allocated absolutely not one minuscule bit of energy to it. And now it's not as much energy as it is awareness and focus on. And it doesn't mean religion. I mean, religion can be the outlet if that's what's good for you, but it's much more a realization of the non-physical aspect of who we are as human beings. We certainly have both a physical and a non-physical
Mhm.
aspect to us. And so it's that whole non-physical and what does that mean? And how does it influence? How am I influenced by it? And what can I do to improve that? And what can I do to help that to make me a better person? How can it help me to be more serene? How can it help me? What can I do to certainly grow in that aspect?
Thank you for that, Susan. On spirituality, many models of well-being have a high component of spirituality, and as I've dug into meaning and the meaning in life, spirituality often plays a larger role than I would have previously thought about. So that's why I asked you that.
I think it's a very important component. It's one that a lot of people don't like to talk about. It's a very personal thing, but nevertheless, whether you're willing to talk about it or not, it's something that we all should be contributing. We all should be spending part of our time focusing on that and developing it and improving our ability to be the best we can be spiritual.
Mm, mhm. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation on the happiness portfolio. I have one question that I want to land this plane of a conversation, and then I have a final one that I ask everybody. I guess I want to make a statement that is showing up in my mind because it kept coming up over and over. Is that there are seasons, and I'm asking for your wise advice here. There are seasons in our life that we're going to be busier. Our portfolio is not going to be fully equally distributed among the 8 sections. There are times where work takes up a lot of time, and that's okay. But what I'm hearing you say as we draw a conclusion is that we got one of these finite lives where each day we never get back again, and the focus is recognizing that we do have 8 assets in our happiness portfolio.
That's so true. And as you say, sometimes one of them requires you to spend more time. And yes, if that has to be temporarily, it has to be. But put yourself back in balance when it's over.
Online, I read that you've said a few times in different articles that a life well lived, I'm paraphrasing there, is aligned, engaged, and connected. When you think about aligned, engaged, and connected, which one of those do you think took you the longest to learn, if any at all?
Aligned. And by that, I mean, when I say aligned with your core values and aligned with your purpose.
Mm,
And for me, it took a while to be aware of how important focusing on purpose is, and then what was my purpose. And so that is one of the things that I encourage everybody to focus on because of the fundamental importance of it to all of us and to how it impacts our lives in such a positive way when you are absolutely aligned with that.
mm. Thank you for that. My final question that I've asked everybody is now let's imagine you find yourself sitting on a front porch. You're looking out at a view that gives you complete peace, ease, and a feeling of content. You decide to bring a notebook out to write a letter on what you learned was a key to have a happy and meaningful life. What would be the message?
It would be to be consciously aware of the choices that you make every day, aware of who you are, what is important to you, who is important to you, and why, and live your life in alignment with those values.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate our time together, Marianne. For listeners who are interested about your work, your book, where would you point them towards?
The name of my book is Your Happiness Portfolio for Retirement. It's not about the money. The money's important for retirement, but the book doesn't say anything about money. Before I wrote the book, I did some research, and all of the books about this time of your life were about money. There were none that weren't, or very, very, very few. So this one is about the non-financial part of what do you want your life to be like? And actually, you don't even need the word retirement in there. It applies to any time in your life, but retirement's an important topic for many people right now.
Well, thank you so much for the insightful conversation. We will link your book and your website in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you for tuning in this week to the You Potential podcast. That conversation was great. It really had me thinking a lot. As you could tell, I was often reflecting my own thoughts back to Marianne, and she was great to play along. Something that really stood out to me is her story about her father, how he held up his business card and said, "Today, it opens every door. Tomorrow, it won't be worth the paper it's written on." That was really powerful. We put so much time and energy into work, our identities at work, that we have to pay attention to the fact that one day that card will not be worth the paper it's written on. So my question for you today, my question for myself today, is when you look at your happiness portfolio, what areas are you perhaps spending too much time on? What assets need a little bit more attention in this season of your life so that you can live the happiest and the best part of whatever chapter you are in your life story? Before you head out, I would love it if you can head over to YouTube, subscribe to the channel, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And while you're at it, please leave us a review. We appreciate it. Until next time, take care.